Let's start by introducing yourself, your character, and a little bit about your character. And let's start with Matthew.
Hi, I'm Matthew Janisse. I play Mark Cohen. He is the narrator of Rent. He's a filmmaker, and the Rent is really seen through the lens of Mark, through his life of these friends that live together. Yeah.
My name is James Murray. I'm playing Roger Davis. He is a recovering drug addict with AIDS, and he kind of works into the puzzle as learning how to survive with this, and not just survive, but thrive and enjoy life.
Rent is the encore show for the Wagon Wheel. It's the first year they're doing this. What makes Rent stand out from the rest of the shows this season?
I think what's really special about the encore season and with Rent is that there's not a sense of censorship that has to be done, because with the summer season we want to make it a family-oriented thing where they can come to any of them. There's usually one show in the summer season that's a little like, I know last year Wedding Singer was our it might be a little blah, 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 just because there was making out in it, I guess. But now with Rent, we're not. It's heavier issues dealing with homosexuality, with AIDS, with addiction, with death, and it's also how people in New York really talk. So there's a lot of foul language, but it all serves a purpose. So rather than having to edit it and tarnish the piece, it is left intact for what it's supposed to be.
And I think one of the great reasons that we're starting with Rent is because it is so well respected in the theater community. So it does give the people of Warsaw, the Wagon Wheel Theatre community, it gives them all a chance to see the other side of Broadway and hopefully give them a new perspective on what theater can be.
When was the first time you guys saw Rent yourselves, and how did it affect you or move you, or what kind of impact did it have?
Rent is actually the reason I'm in musical theater. It's the reason I'm at Warsaw right now. In freshman year, I was in Rent. I got cast in it, and I wasn't into musical theater, and I got into the show just because I liked listening to the show, and then I got into it, and that got me into the school for musical theater, and then I started doing musicals because of Rent.
I kind of grew up with the soundtrack first, and then I did get to see the movie when it came out, and then I saw the tour and all that sort of stuff. But it was the heaviest, most dramatic show that I had listened to date. Like before that had been like Music Man and Guys and Dolls and all that sort of fluffy stuff. So Rent was kind of like eye-opening to people actually, they don't just this isn't just news stories. Like people talk about these real issues in theater too.
Well, a lot of the issues which you've mentioned have kind of changed since the early 90s when it came out. I mean, AIDS has changed, homosexuality, in some states there's gay marriage now. So is this musical kind of dated or not, or is it still as relevant today as it was then?
I think it is as relevant today as it was back then. Of course, things were more shocking back then, so it was really an opening of doors for some topics. But we still have certain things that we deal with now. There's still states that don't accept gay marriage. There are still people who have qualms about homosexuality in general. There are still people who don't know about exactly what happens with AIDS, and that it's still a thing. And I think what's really reflexive of right now is we're all dealing with this ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, which I think is perfect timing for this show to come out, because it's about a disease that doesn't get a lot of attention, that is now coming forth through some form of entertainment, because the Ice Bucket Challenge is a form of publicity and entertainment, but it shines light on something that is an issue, just like Rent does. It shines light on these problems that are still prevalent today.
And all of the problems, they aren't necessarily specifically supposed to be about what they are. It's also about the entire concept of how do you deal with things that are outside of the norm or things that make you uncomfortable, and how can you use those things as education for the youth or for the adults or people who are uncomfortable with that sort of stuff. And the message of Rent isn't about the AIDS or the disease or the prostitution or anything like that. It's about learning how to make the most out of your life, whatever it is.
Okay. Let's talk specifically about your characters, Mark and Roger. They're roommates, and they get along well, but sometimes they have these little conflicts among themselves. How would you guys look at your relationship with your characters?
Well, yeah, we are roommates. Mark has been through the entire process. Roger's girlfriend finds out that the two of them have AIDS, Roger and Roger's girlfriend, and then she proceeds to commit suicide. And ever since that happened, he's just been in a downward spiral of depression, not leaving the house. So Mark has pretty much been his only form of contact. So I think we kind of catch the tail end of that by the end, like by midway in the show. Roger is finally out, but I think Mark's kind of had it with being Roger's only source of like the outside world. So that does sort of cause some conflict between the two of them.
And as far as Mark Cohen's experience in the show, we talk about being no day but today and living for the moment. And Mark, his journey through trying to get Roger to connect with the world is figuring out that he is not connecting with the world, and how he, as someone who is just, white, male, straight, not infected, how do I connect with the world even though I have everything going for me? What is stopping me from living for today? And a lot of it has to do with him observing and not living, because he's the cameraman.
At least for me, I guess the heart of the show is Angel and his character, and he does affect a lot of the other characters. Would you say that's true, especially for your characters, and how does Angel affect your guys' characters?
Absolutely. I mean, what smart writing to have that character be named Angel. She comes and enters this world of these like 5 or 6 friends and shows them what unconditional love is, and that what acceptance feels like. And we see it not by her saying like, oh, you need to love each other, just by demonstration. And I think it touches everyone in a moment. And I think audiences will be touched by her as well.
Every single time that this show is done, the person who plays Angel gets the most love out of anybody in the show, just because it is written as such a warm, just beacon of light for the entire show. When everybody else is sort of struggling with their stuff, Angel has accepted his path. He has AIDS, and he knows it, and you get to see his entire journey through that, but he's accepted it, and he is still living and making the most out of his life, dressing however he wants, and just pleasing, like making everybody in the show happy.
Okay. Speaking kind of your own selves, have you, I guess, learned from this show, from previous experience? Has this show changed you? Have you been more accepting of yourselves or others? Or I guess, how has this show made you grow?
Absolutely. Just knowing this show, I was in New York. I moved to New York last year, so I'd spent a year in New York, and finding out about this job while I was there, it was a moment to be like, all right, I'm playing Mark, and I'm living in New York. How does that sort of reflect me? And it really, when you dive into a piece, you really look at the lessons that the show gives you, and it's a reminder to be alive and awake and take advantage of everything. And I know when I got the job and I started thinking about that, I started taking advantage of the city more. I went out more. I did more things. I went to the Cloisters. I went to Battery Park City. I went to try and find the Live Cafe, which is closed now. But it reawakened my life. Oh, God.
Growing up with a soundtrack, you can kind of become desensitized to what the actual words are. But once I got into rehearsals for this show, it caused me to go back through the script and actually read and listen to what the people in the show were saying, and it definitely made me want to explore things more and just not just sit idly by while the world passes, actually be engaged and be there and thrive, as opposed to just watching it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the music. The show's called a rock opera because some of those songs just do kind of rock, but talk a little bit about the music and why it's so catchy and people are drawn to it, sometimes even before they even see the show.
Well, Jonathan Larson, who wrote the show, is a genius. He passed before his time. He passed on the night of the first preview, I believe. And the music he writes is so intricate, and he wasn't writing a musical to write a musical. Some people wanted to write in the musical style in the time that he was writing the show, but he wrote what he wanted, the contemporary rock sound that he had, the grunge sound that wasn't necessarily unearthed yet. And it's infectious, and it agitates you, but in a good way. It makes you really sit on the edge of your seat and hear what are they saying? And the lyrics and everything are just so poignant and beautiful and so well written. The music's incredible.
Yeah, and so new for its time that that it was rock and roll. Because even now things come out like Bridges of Madison County, Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder, that are these sort of sweeping, big musical theater sounds. So the fact that this is a rock and roll music, I think, connects people better, because it's not this old, oh, Oklahoma, where the wind comes weeping down the rain. It's music you can literally turn on at, like, any day and see, like, oh, you hear an Aerosmith song, oh, you hear, like, an Elvis song, well, not Elvis, but, like, you start hearing, like, Billy Idol song, and then you're like, oh, Rent fits into that. There's this thing on iTunes called Genius where it makes your own playlist. A lot of times I'll put on, like, Billy Joel, and then a Rent song will come on. I'll be like, oh, okay, rock and roll. But that's because it's seamless. It's music today that affects people now. And it also rock and roll in its own sense has an angst and has a heart to it, beat to it, which we all as characters have.
Okay. There's a lot of songs from La Vie Boheme, but the one that people will do regardless of the Seasons of Love, you'll see high schools include that in a musical or whatever. Seasons of Love, can you talk specifically about that song and why it connects with people maybe more than the other songs on the soundtrack?
Well, I think that is that and No Day But Today are the capstones of what this musical is trying to express, because it's about, one, it's asking questions. It's how do you measure a year in a life? Do you measure it through what you do? No, you should measure it in love, and the love you give and share, not by your successes, not by your torments, by the love you give and the love you share.
It's I don't know. You said that beautifully. The show, that song is not necessarily incorporated into the rest of the show. Typically when it's done, the show is all like movement and very grungy, and then that song is the beginning of Act 2, and the cast is just standing stage, like, straight line. So it kind of takes everything out of context and literally just says the exact, like, motif of the show, the exact theme, like measuring your life in love, not in the things you win or lose or buy or anything like that. It's really just about cherishing the moments and the people that you're with.
One thing that I first noticed when I saw Rent years ago was how diverse the cast was. It's black, Hispanic, and white, and whatever. How integral of a part is the diversity in the show? Or,
I think the story can be told if it was all a one-raced cast, but I think the diversity really shows more that this is life, because life is diverse, and especially it being set in New York. New York is not, the country club in Wyoming. It is a melting pot. So I think the diversity is just a reflection of real life in New York, and we have a very diverse cast.
Yeah, they utilized the diversity to show that this is what New York is like right now, and just they didn't try to hide it, or a lot of times musical theater is like, all one race and showing one specific thing, but they utilized all of the races to make it as relevant and culturally real as possible. And like in the show, everybody brought costumes from their own like wardrobe, and that's what they wore on stage, just to make it as real as possible, and we are definitely doing that in our production as well.
Okay. Well, we talked a little about Angel and you guys' character, but talk a little bit about the other characters in the show and how they, I guess, move the story along and how they affect your guys' characters, because I think there's 6 or 7 other characters.
It's sort of, Rent to me is the edgy version of Friends, because at one point all of these people live together, and we meet. So it's Roger, Mark, Benny, Maureen, Collins. Mm-hmm. These are the 5 people who live together, and then we meet these secondary characters through other people. Angel is introduced through Collins. Joanne is introduced through Maureen, and these are all different people. Maureen is my ex-girlfriend, who then falls in love with a woman, which is, harsh blow. But she's a drama queen, very expressive. She shows the performance art that was going on at the time in New York. That was a very big movement in the 90s, especially in New York, fighting for rights, fighting for attention, fighting for all these things. You have Joanne, who's also a lesbian, and a lawyer who shows sort of the grounded side of being alternative, but because of her homosexuality, that makes her alternative. But she as a human is very whitewashed and very order, yada yada, except for Maureen, who pulls it out of her.
And then we have characters like Benny, who used to be our roommate, and then he married someone from upstate New York and became very hoity-toity, and now is trying to blackmail us into canceling Maureen's protest. And Collins, who used to live with us, is now a teacher at MIT and then gets like kicked out and all that sort of stuff. And then we run into a character named Mimi, who is a dancer and also a drug addict, and she comes into our apartment one day looking for any sort of heat source, like a lighter or something to like smoke up, essentially. And then we end up falling in love, and that's a lot of the conflict of the show is our relationship and her trying to pull my life back together, or telling me to wake up, essentially, and me fighting it, and then ultimately making the decision to live or not live. Or
Okay. Well, we've kind of mentioned this a little bit about, AIDS, and it is a lot about AIDS and HIV. I guess I want to see how that affects the characters in some way. So how does it affect your characters, and then maybe how are you yourselves? I mean, you guys both probably know people with HIV/AIDS, and so does that make the roles of the show more important? Does it affect you?
Yeah, I think yes, it does make it more important. Only because of the severity of AIDS. This is loosely based on the opera La Bohème, which back then, in La Bohème, it's tuberculosis, which back then was a horrible disease. Mm-hmm. So I think this is for this time period, it's just, what is the worst disease? What is the thing that tears you apart, that you see people lose their lives, that drain their life force? And I think that's the real important thing that AIDS does for the show, is that when you have it, you really then have to look at your own mortality and what you're doing with life. Because especially back then, we didn't have the research, we didn't have any funding. AZT was experimental at the time, which is what everyone has, and it ruins you. And like we've seen things like HBO just had the Normal Heart that came up, which was brilliant in showing what the AIDS epidemic really looked like in the homosexual culture. And that sort of people losing all their weight and vomiting and having sores and being weak and dying left and right really is what informs the show and gives it that time crunch and that pressure to live now, live today. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You need to embrace your friends, because what if they're gone tomorrow? And that doesn't necessarily have to just be with AIDS. I think the show wants you to do that with everyone, because you never know what can happen. Not even AIDS or disease, car accidents, losses of anything. It really is just to add emphasis on love each other, because they might be gone.
And in the context of the show, my character he has AIDS, and I think it's somewhat of a recent development. And his girlfriend, once she finds out that they have AIDS, she immediately commits suicide. She slits her wrists in the bathroom and bleeds out. And so Roger doesn't do that, but there's such a struggle inside of him as like, why haven't I just ended my own life? Like, I know what's going to happen. I am going to have sores. I am going to be sick, and all that sort of stuff that Matthew mentioned. Like, all of that stuff could happen to Roger. Like, that terrifies him, yet he's still alive. And he's trying to figure out why he is still alive. So I'm very blessed to not have any sort of debilitating diseases or anything like that. So trying to put yourself into that and just understand, like, the desperation in there and the, like, just the total darkness as, why have I not offed myself? There's got to be a reason for it. I'm still alive, and trying to find that reason. And ultimately, the course of the show does open Roger's eyes to why he should still be alive.
Do you want to say that what it is, or do you want to kind of hold?
It's the entire theme of the show. It is just literally living for today, but not just choosing to live, like living for today and being alive and open and warm and loving to everybody. And that's just the theme of the show. It's not like a giant revelation. It's just finally like the wall is finally broken down in Roger's heart, and he finally lets people in. It finally opens up, and I think that happens to a lot of people in the show, not just Roger. But his is the one that's sort of pushed to the forefront at points.
And I think that's hard to do. I think it's hard to love people and accept people when you have so much life, because life is hard. And especially in the show, their lives are very hard. But even if you live a cushy life, it's still hard to love everyone. You have your own perceptions and your own realities. It really is just a lesson in caring and being open to everyone.
And accepting that you have your baggage, but everybody else also has their baggage. So loving people with their baggage, not in spite of or instead of or ignoring the baggage, but accepting all of who someone is and just loving them openly.
Okay. Every time I've basically seen Rinse, it's kind of more on a square stage.
Proscenium.
Yeah. And this is the first time I remember seeing it in the round. So how do you guys address doing Rent in the round? I mean, is it challenging? Is it?
Well, I think like every show that's been done here, I mean, most shows are written for proscenium, so there's always the director has to take a moment and go, how do I make these moments work in the round rather than being able to see pictures of images? I think what Rent being in the round will give you that you don't get in proscenium is a true intimacy of being engulfed in these people's lives. Like every show that happens at Wagon Wheel, you're part of it because every seat is 9 seats away. Like you're always going to be in it, and you'll be able to see all the little characters, all the ensembles who are doing incredible work as homeless people, as drug addicts, that all inform what's the ambiance of the time. And it being in the round, you get to see that more. You get to see every little detail, especially on the different sections. Depending on what section you sit in, you can get informed about different things. You see a character do something special that you wouldn't have gotten to see, where in proscenium, everything is, you have to look at this, now look at this, where in Wagon Wheel, we just live in the world and let you experience whatever you take.
I think Rent actually is going to be so great in the round. Like, when I think about shows like Rent, I think is going to work so well and will work so well in the round because it is just a world that you are then just going to be transported into, and you can, like Matthew said, look at anything. We're not like shooting a movie where you only see one still and they force you to look at that one thing. Like you can literally look at anything on the stage, and our set is beautiful. It's like a grown-ups jungle gym that we're just going to climb all over, and it's just going to immerse you into the city and the grunge and the dirt of the world that these people live in, and yet still somehow find joy in that.
Okay. So when a person sees a show, whether it's for the first time or in my case, 5 millionth time, what do you hope they leave with after seeing the Wagon Wheel production of it? An open mind or what?
I think an open mind, an understanding of what a horrible time people can have, but through love and through support, they can overcome anything.
And I hope they walk out at the end as opposed to somewhere in the middle. Because it is a very edgy show, but we are not doing anything gratuitous intentionally, and Scott's made that very clear. In some productions, they go for shock value. We're not going for shock value. We're just going for the message to love everyone and accept your own baggage and love people through that. So by the end of that show, that message is like plastered all over the walls. So I hope they walk out with that feeling at the end, and just the feeling of hope and love and just joy for being alive.
Okay. And the last question I have for you is, anything you want people to know about the show or about rehearsing the show or being in the show? Or
I would say don't let the fact that it's R-rated deter you from seeing it, because it is a poignant, important piece of theater that if you allow yourself to accept it for what it is, you will grow, and you will cry, and you will laugh, and your life will be effective in some way, because it is just that beautiful. So don't let the fact that we swear in it deter you. Don't let the themes deter you. It's real life, and these are the things we need to be seeing.
It's been an incredible experience. It's been my first at Wagon Wheel, and because it is such a small cast of only 12 actors, we've become a family, and hopefully our love for each other off stage projects to our lives on stage, and then projects into the audience, and the audience feels that love. But stay for the whole thing. You're gonna
cool.
love it.
Well, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.